the first instinct was to say, oh, we use our guns for hunting or we use our guns for personal defense. It's like, no, stop with that. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to arm the public to prevent an authoritarian government from taking over in our country. That's quite literally the only fucking reason for it.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Ian Burlingame. You're a former Special Forces operator. I figured, you might have some interesting things to say about all the stupid shit that's going on in the world right now. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. You?
Doing well, yeah. So before we get into all the nonsense that happens in our country these days, let's start with you. Where you come from originally?
Grew up mostly in the mountains of Washington, northern Washington on the Canadian border, and then Idaho. Originally out of California, and went back many years later. Spent 30 years in San Francisco.
Oh wow!
In the tech space.
Yeah, I spent 7 years or so. I lived in Oakland and worked in San Francisco at on Sansom at the immigration building down there, doing intel stuff. I worked in private security as well. But yeah, it was weird how quickly that place turned into a pretty cool area to a complete shithole. I mean, it was like within 2 years, it kind of seems like everything fell apart.
Moral relativism, when it takes hold, man, things decay quick. And that thin veneer of polite society just unravels rather quickly in front of us.
What did you say sometime in your early childhood you left California, went up to the Pacific Northwest, hung out in the mountains? What was that like?
Well, at the time, it was pretty horrible. It was a rough time. My mother started a commune that didn't do so well, and she came from a privileged family and didn't really understand what work, and didn't understand how hard it was going to be to actually live off the land and to get other people to put in the effort and time to do it. So it was pretty rough years. But now I look back and I'm grateful for them for many reasons.
What reasons are those? I mean, just like tough times are usually a good thing, to be honest. I mean, we have this tendency to not we specifically, but a lot of people in the West these days have a tendency to see themselves as somebody that something happens to instead of somebody who does things. I think it's a pretty good to make that distinction intentionally in your own life. But it is like, it's easy to, when things are fucked up, to be like, oh no, woe is me or whatever. It's another thing to be like, all right, cool, I'm probably learning something right now.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with that. I would say the two things that I take away from it my whole life is how little you need to actually live a good life to actually be comfortable. And when you have very little to nothing, and sometimes you're going without food, and it's 30 degrees below zero outside for weeks on end, it doesn't take very much to... You take joys from the little things. And then on the other side is, boy, you can sure... Human beings are designed historically, going back millions of years, to be durable in some pretty horrible situations over long periods of time.
Yeah, I like that idea. I learned that I'd never really run that much until I went to the 82nd Airborne. Like I played baseball, so I would jog. I was a pitcher, so I would jog to run off lactic acid and shit. But you're running like a 9 or 10 minute mile for two or 3 miles, which is honestly, it's kind of like the airborne shuffle at airborne school. You don't really break a sweat doing it. You know what I mean? It's pointless. Yeah. It's really just about doing something to do it, the discipline, and airborne school is stupid, to be honest. When my dad went back in the 70s, they were still wearing jump boots to do all the airborne shuffle. It made sense then. Doing the airborne shuffle in like high quality tennis shoes is like, you may as well seriously be walking. It's nothing is happening there. But anyways, when I got to the 82nd and my psychotic company commander, started running 7-minute miles through Area J through sand and shit like that. I'm like, oh, cool. Okay, this sucks. I can't do this.
Yeah.
Like my first instinct was, I've never done something like this before. I can't do this. And then I realized that after long distance endurance, especially after a certain point, you can go indefinitely as long as you stay hydrated and keep electrolytes in your body. Like you can literally never stop if you do things the right way. And I was like, and that was a huge wake up moment for me, because before that, and same thing with ruck marches as well. Before that, I thought there was some upper limit to the amount that I could accomplish physically, and there is, with regard to how fast I can run and how much weight I can lift. But as far as how long I can do it for, I don't think there really is. I think that's mostly a preparation and mental thing, and you can go quite a bit harder than you thought you would. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, until the body's been pushed, we don't know how far it can go. And we're designed, lots of anthropological studies and studies in medicine that we're designed to run for 2 to 4 hours a day in ancient ancestors. And then the hunter-gatherers, a lot of time you ran your prey down. And they still do, the Bushmen still do, the Aborigines in Australia, et cetera. So, and to a point to your 82nd, I went through airborne school in 1990 and we still wore boots.
Oh, wow. Yeah. By the time I got there, everybody's wearing tennis shoes. And I was like, and I remember looking at old videos of people doing it on the internet before I went. It's like, all right, that looks like it sucks. And then when I got there, I'm like, oh, this is stupid. Like, to be honest, airborne school should be 1 week. I don't think you need 3 weeks for that. Frankly, to learn how to fall out of the sky, it seems like a week would do. But anyways,
but then you couldn't lord it over the air assault guys.
Yeah, because they're 10 days, I think, for air assault.
Yeah. So you need the extra days to make it official.
From what I understand, I never went to air assault school, but I heard it's quite a bit harder than airborne. To be honest, like you just get the
I
shit
didn't go
out
either.
of you.
So I couldn't say.
At any rate, your body can do quite a bit more than you think, but it's again. Untested, you really never know what your capabilities are, and this coddling that we do in American society these days is some people are still incredulous. Like, how did we get here? What do you mean, how did we get here? We've taken all the standards out of all the standards and all the daring out of humanity at this point. So I'm not sure I'm not sure where we thought it was going to end up. But anyways, back to you. So, go through some tough times, and this goes on through high school, or when does that when does it normalize a little bit for you?
I got put into long-term foster care when I was 14, bounced between some homes. Took me to Alaska for a while in the early 80s. Then I got put in a long-term foster care program called Casey Family, which is the family that founded UPS. Mm-hmm. And that family is how I became a Burlingame when I was the end of my sophomore year. So I left the private schools I was at up in Washington at the time and went to public high school, and life changed considerably. I put on 40 pounds in just over a year and a half, 2 years, just with proper nutrition and the stress load being dramatically lowered, and then getting into sports. And then I went in the Army in 1986.
And what made you decide to join the Army? I mean, it's, to be honest, yours is kind of a classic tale. The special operator community is filled with men that come from broken homes or bad childhood situations. I don't know.
Often with really bad relationships with mothers in particular.
Yeah.
It's like a disproportionate number of guys.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. But you know what the outcome of that is? So some of the more recent testing since 2018 that we've been doing shows that the special operator, and to some degree the infantry guy as well, they burn cortisol at a rate like 3 times higher than normal people. So maybe that's just how it works, right? I don't know. But so what made you decide to join the military?
All I wanted to be since I was a little kid was an astronaut. I was born in 67, went to the moon in 69, and I think the last time, when was the last time? Like 71 or 72
Something
or
like that.
something. Yeah, that's all I wanted to be, was an astronaut, an engineer, aerospace engineer and astronaut. I got congressional appointments to Annapolis and Air Force Academy because I knew at the time Congressman Craig here in Idaho, and his son. I might or might not have kept his son out of trouble a couple times when we were in high school. I went to go do the test. All the aptitude stuff was great until I got to the red-green color test and failed that miserably, and found out I was never going to fly or be an astronaut, et cetera. And kind of in a fit of Scottish rage, I guess you'd say, I said, fuck it, I'm going to go into the combat arms in the Army as an enlisted guy.
And what unit did you go to?
I went to the 1st to the 75th Field Artillery because I listened to a recruiter say that that was the only thing they had available, despite the fact they had 141 GT score. That was an interesting time. I reclassed as quickly as I could to the infantry.
Where did you end up when you reclassed?
I'm sorry?
Where did you go after you reclassed infantry?
I actually went to the Old Guard.
Okay,
so
cool.
I was en route to 82nd, but instead the Old Guard came to recruit me. I'd done a little bit of college in between artillery and infantry, and one of the guys at the university was a badge holder, and he was just one of the most squared away people I'd ever met in my life. Just balanced, whole, you're just a solid guy. So when the Old Guard came and recruited me down in Benning, I said, yeah, sure, I'll go do that.
And did you do like the cavalry stuff, or did you do any of the President's 100 or the Tomb or any of that stuff?
I was a Tomb, yeah. So I was a Tomb Guard for the first month or so. I was in Charlie Company. Then I went up to Honor Guard Company. I was a Tomb Guard for some months. I tore my my right ACL out and damaged my meniscus, and left there. Stayed in Honor Guard Company. I had to get surgery and get my ACL replaced, so I wasn't going to be able to do any of the ceremonial stuff. I was on the presidential casket platoon for a while, doing funerals. They asked me what I wanted to do while I was recovering, and they were doing transition of the mainframe computer systems to network systems. So they were standing up the information management office. I had been doing tech stuff since I was a young teenager, goofing off mostly. And I said, yeah, I'd like to go work with them. And so I did that for the last probably 6 months till I got out early to go on a green to gold scholarship to university.
What year was that?
That was late 90. So I got there in 90 and I left there December 91.
I didn't know green to gold program existed back then. Shit.
Yeah, the program's been around for I think they changed the name of it, but the green to gold program and the different iterations of it have been around forever.
Wow. Well, that's cool. And then this is the early 90s, so there's we had a couple of dust ups. We had in the 80s and 90s, Grenada in 83, Panama in 89.
Panama. Yeah.
Then Gulf stuff, 90, 91, and then Somalia, 92, 93 time frame. But as far as like regular Army deployments, few and far between.
I was at the Old Guard the whole time. Then I went to Boise State University for a short time, and I was in the combat engineers when I was there, reserve unit. And then I went up in the hospital for a year and a half, pancreatitis for some reason. They never figured it out. Now we know decades later why. And that kind of ended and the military stuck me with the bill to protect a captain and her career who sent me to a private doctor. And that kind of turned me off on the military for quite some years, more than a decade and a half.
So did you have a break in service?
Yeah, I left active duty December 91. I left the reserves basically a year later. I went back in late 2008 to try and go SF. I couldn't get an 18 X-ray contract. because of my age. I was in my early 40s. So, but I could go active duty and then try to get crossed over. I had to go do AIT again. I had to do infantry school again.
Oh, wow.
So I went through Harmony Church in 90 and Sand Hill in 2009.
And this is enlisted again?
Yeah, enlisted.
And then
Yeah.
what was that? Where'd you get assigned to first? What unit?
Actually, I got crossed over. So I did tech and finance and all that stuff in the 17 years in between. I tried to be a writer for a while out in Sun Valley, realized I didn't know enough life yet. And then I went back to Silicon Valley, tried to be a pro triathlete. I wasn't getting anywhere close to the times Mike Pigg and the other guys were getting. And now I know why. They were Armstronging, shall we say.
Yeah,
I did get crossed over to the X-ray program at Benning just about at the end of my second go through in 20 years through infantry school. And then after the Q course, I went straight to 1st Battalion, 1st Group, and I spent my whole time there.
Sorry, I'm just taking some notes here. What was that like? I mean, how old were you when you finally got to the teams or to group?
I was 44 years old when I got to my ODA. I was 40. My 42nd birthday was the second day of selection in 2009, April 2009. And then I separated my shoulder and didn't get selected then. I had to go back 6 months later and do selection again.
And at the time, you were stationed where exactly?
Well, in school, of course, at Bragg.
Yeah.
But in 1st Battalion, 1st Group was Okinawa, Japan.
So you spent time in Okinawa afterwards?
I spent almost 4 years in Okinawa. I mean, I was almost never there, but I was stationed in Okinawa. My family was there.
Sure.
My ex-wife and my daughter.
They actually let you take family over there. I guess if you're there long enough. So you didn't spend too much time at JBLM or anything?
The only time I've been in JBLM is for schools, specialty schools, and then part of PMT before we went to Afghanistan in 2012.
And what schools did you take back there? Because a lot of these schools, I mean, some of the regular Army schools have gone on the road now. Like they'll have not airborne, but they'll have air assault. They'll have sniper schools and shit like that go on the road. But SOTIC, Sephardic, and all that stuff for long gunners it has to be mobile to some degree because you dudes are spread all over the fucking country sometimes, or all over the world rather. What schools did you go to back at JBLM?
Yeah, with the SIF in Okinawa, SECO, which is who I spent my last 3 years with, we do our own cephalics. The schools I did at JBLM were all exploit-related schools.
Exploit, you mean like
I went down
EW exploit, or you mean like human stuff?
Human stuff and technical.
And what was that like getting to an ODA? What was the reaction from the other guys? Because there's a lot of, I mean, in the mid 2000s to 2010s, there were quite a few 25-year-olds on Special Forces teams for the first time in a while, since the inception.
The early 80s.
Yeah.
Well, actually, since the early 80s. They had the SF baby program in the early 80s where you'd get some younger guys, but there hadn't been that program since.
Yeah. So what was that like getting there? You're 44 years old. I
was the second oldest guy in the battalion. The battalion sergeant major.
Yeah.
yeah, battalion sergeant major. And he wasn't that much older than me. I think maybe a little over a year.
What were you, an E6 by then? You probably had, because you came in. You probably came back in as an E4, right?
Yeah. I made E6 just shortly after getting to the team, and I'm grateful for it. But it was interesting. One, I'd been in the Army for years before, and I remember the old Army, and this was not the old Army. And so I made some missteps there. And I'd had a lot of life experience doing a lot of other things. technology, building tech companies, and being an investor and investing in tech companies and investment banking analyst in China and Europe and elsewhere. I probably wasn't a very good team player. I mean, it was all about the mission, all about the team and the mission, but I probably wasn't a very good team player other than playing football when I was younger. All the sports I'd done were solo sports. So it was a rough go, but I take a good amount of that responsibility on myself.
And how did you develop over time? I mean, it's there's the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but that's not true. I mean, but one of the things that
Yeah,
that characterizes most gunfighters is adaptability. Otherwise, you will not live, right? Like you learn lessons or you die for the most part. So what was
yeah.
it like? What was it like? I guess somebody middle aged learning a bunch of new shit, probably from people that were younger than you, but more expertise in that specific skill set at the time.
Fortunately for me, I've always been of the mind. So I had a very strange, unique mother who taught me some things, very old world things. And one of the things she taught me when I was young, and then one of my first platoon sergeants back in the 80s, when I first got my team leadership role as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, both my mother and he basically said the same thing, which is they're not here for you, you're here for them. They have skills and expertise in things that you need to understand and know how to support. And their life's hard, your life's easier. Your job is to do the best you can to provide cover for them and keep their lives from being as difficult as they can be, which means, again, understanding what they do and how to use and benefit from that. So I've never really had a problem if the younger person knows what the hell they're talking about. I've never really had any difficulty taking instruction.
Yeah.
Me
Either. Yeah.
How old was Audie Murphy when he got on top of that tank?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, shit. I've never had an issue with that. I never understood that. I know there's like some level of ego involved, I guess, but it always felt kind of weak to not be able to learn new shit regardless of who it came from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I just kind of, in my mind, the way that human beings learn things is you are wrong about or ignorant about every single thing right up until the point that you're right about it. So why would you be like, you can take pride in the effort you've taken to learn new things. That makes sense. But taking pride in just knowing the thing seems kind of stupid to me, right? It's a 1 or a 0. It's binary. You either know it or you don't.
Yeah. For me, I've always tried to understand the connections between things. Why is a thing the way it is, rather than what the thing is? Because I've found ever since I was a little kid that the thing itself might change, but the reasons why things are rarely change.
Yeah. I mean, I think like Plato's forms is something interesting to like. I think later on, some of his disciples were like, okay, what he's saying isn't exactly correct, but here are some of the things you can extrapolate from it. I think it's really important for people to go back and understand. I'm sorry, not Plato, Socrates. Socrates' extrapolation of Plato's theory of forms is something. What the fuck's going on with the camera there, guy?
No idea.
Anyways, yeah, I think
They don't like Socrates.
I know they don't.
Yeah.
It's probably China. The extrapolation of Plato's forms and thinking about like what you said, the idea of like what is a table, or the tableism is a state that something can be, or something like
the
that.
essence of
the essence of it. Yeah, I think that's really important, not to get bogged down intellectual. Like you shouldn't make that your religion or your primary focus. But it is interesting to understand that, because what it does is it makes you see things, and he mapped it onto, like, in a lot of ways mapped it onto the structure of a brain or something, which was not technically correct. Mm-hmm. But think of it like a pyramid or a triangle, kind of like the food pyramid, which is also not correct. But think of it that way, where from an epistemological standpoint, there are fundamentals that stack on top of each other that make something what it is, right? And understanding it at the root level is super important. I tell people this about first principles in government quite a bit, right? Like if you don't understand what the actual purpose of a particular liberty is, why it exists, why it was enumerated the way it was at that time, then you'll never understand how to apply it, no matter what the time period is. Like people say that a lot of folks will say that the Constitution is a living document, and to some degree that's true because there's 27 amendments to it. It has been, kept alive through that way. It's also kept alive. The principles stay the same, but it has been kept alive by how things change over time, and you have to learn how it applies to now, right? But you can never do that unless you understand specifically the first principle, why that exists in the first place. Freedom of speech, I think, is pretty obvious, but one that we fucked up over the last 30 years, 40 years maybe, is the Second Amendment. When liberals started trying to come after guns in a real way, not just against black people back in the day, which is how all gun control started. It was just to keep guns out of the hands of black people. But when they started it mass across the country, the first instinct was to say, oh, we use our guns for hunting, or we use our guns for personal defense. It's like, no, stop with that. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to arm the public to prevent an authoritarian government from taking over in our country. That's quite literally the only fucking reason for it. Hunting is something you can do because of that, I guess, but that's downstream of the Second Amendment. It has nothing to do with it.
I can hunt with a bow and arrow.
Yeah, for real. So yeah, like understanding that first principle is so important because one, you're going to be able to argue the case better, which is important, but two, you actually understand why it exists. And you can pass that why, that essence, or whatever you want to call it, down to the next generation. So instead of just this right that exists on a piece of paper that's 240 years old, these people understand the actual importance of it. And we're not doing a very good job of transmitting institutional knowledge about first principles through the generations right now.
Are you familiar with split brain studies, left hemisphere versus right hemisphere?
To some degree, yeah.
So Dr. Ian McGilchrist probably does the best articulation of this now. There's a little 12-minute RSA video that's one of those drawing animations. It's really, I think everybody should watch it. The left hemisphere, just as a quick, the left hemisphere deals with tables, facts, and datas, the things. And the right hemisphere, both hemispheres deal with everything. They process all things, right? So it's not this left brain, right brain. That's not the way the brain works. But the left hemisphere deals with tables, lists, formal descriptions, et cetera, et cetera. And the right hemisphere deals with the connectivity between those things, the context. And we see this again and again in patients that have had one hemisphere damaged or portions of one hemisphere damaged, or which have had chemically or electrically or otherwise one hemisphere turned off, et cetera, et cetera. It plays over and over and over again. You can also see the utilization of the two different hemispheres in hunting and in survival in birds that have their eyes out the opposite sides of the head. The bird will turn its head to the right, use its left eye, which is the right hemisphere, to broad field, to find something in the broad field that it wants to focus on. It'll turn back its head to the left, use its right eye, left hemisphere to provide a evaluation to whatever it is that it's seen, and to initiate a control, meaning a function that it wants to do. And it'll keep doing that as it gets down to the thing. And then let's say that it's a crow and it's on the road and it's looking to eat whatever the item is on the road, it will keep switching its head back and forth. It'll go to the right, left eye, right hemisphere to make sure it's still safe in the environment. And then it'll turn back to the left, right eye, left hemisphere to execute, the pecking of the beak, body movement, et cetera. what's happened is we've become more and more technological, as we've become more and more bureaucratic, as we've honestly lost our sense of the divine, that universal connecting force, entity, whatever. We've more and more focused on the left hemisphere, and we very rarely use the right to provide us the context of things anymore. And this is very much, embedded in our educational system, our professional systems, et cetera. It puts us in a very, very dangerous situation, however, to where we are so focused on the execution, on the describing of things and the execution of actions based off of that we're not taking into consideration the broader context of what's happening. And that's how you get wiped out.
Sure, yeah.
Right. That's how black swans happen.
Yeah, you leave yourself defenseless. I mean, we've got black swans on the horizon in a lot of different ways. I mean, one of them is our energy grid is a lot more susceptible than people think. I mean, in an old school way, if you wanted to take a bunch of stuff out, like not just one side of the country or another, or one sector, but it used to be that you would have to attack 9 locations at the same time. Now, some of them could be cyber attacks. Some of them would need to be physical attacks because there's no way to get in there. And we're lucky because they were built over time, and they had very disparate technologies behind them, right? So you would have to run a brute force attack on one, another one you're going to have to do some encryption, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into too much detail there, but as of 2021, there's only one spare, quote unquote, spare relay in the entire United States, right? One spare relay. So, and it would take, the time to construct a new one is about 13 months, 14 months maybe. So if 2 of our relays get hit at the same time, 2 of the physical structures get hit at the same time, we're fucked, right? That part of the country's energy grid is going down. There's no stopping it. And what we know is that every 3 months, for the first 3 months, for a nationwide outage, you're going to see somewhere around 3 million deaths. This is like children in hospitals. It's old people in hospitals mostly, right? And then it becomes exponential after that. 6, 9, and 12 months, you start seeing millions and millions of people die because of lack of sanitation, all this other stuff, right? We are right on the precipice of an absolute disaster, and we're arguing over which elderly person to put in charge. You know what I mean? It's like, I get it. There's one choice, in my opinion, that's clearly better than the other, but we are, as you said, so narrowly focused now on the minutia. We have our left eye is no longer scanning for the fucking larger threats.
Correct.
I mean,
it may sound like so it may sound like a shift, but it's not. We can see all of this taking off substantively. The precursor for all of this left hemisphere dominant stuff goes back through the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Excuse me, and really back to the 1600s in Europe and the UK. Europe would lead to the Peace of Westphalia, which was establishing the merchant princes as the dominant force versus the hereditary princes, and the monetization, financialization of things increasingly over time, theft of the commons. And in the United Kingdom, it was the British Civil War become, quote unquote, the Glorious Revolution. We'll talk about horrible rebranding. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, the effort in the legal profession to remove natural law, to move the practice of law, while it is still, quote unquote, the common law system, so all precedent based, but actually in practice it becomes more like civil law, where it's prescriptive based. We saw that, so that's been a steady progress. And what does that do? Well, the practice of law in the British common law system going back to the 800s, 900s, ensured that there was that context related. Now, there was abuses and all of that at different times, but was to ensure that in the legal profession, and therefore in the holding of our personal engagements and relationships and contracting, to some kind of a broader spectrum, contextually aware system, that started to go away. And in the 1990s, there were I can't remember the name of the act, but there was the three strikes law, et cetera.
Yes, the Brady or the crime bill, I guess.
Yeah, the crime bill, which good old Biden was a big part of,
Yeah.
right?
Well, he takes
And
credit for writing it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, and who knows? I don't keep up with these things, but the point is that when we removed natural law, which is first principles, as you were saying, right? Fundamental principles. When we finally had those removed from the last bastion of, almost in a way to say, humanity, what we ensured is that increasingly everything everywhere around us was devoid of those first principles, such as freedom of speech, such as the right to private property, such as the right to self-defense, right? Fundamental, those three things alone are absolutely fundamental to being human and having a humanist system. And they've been under attack for 400 years. And in the 90s is when they finally removed natural law, for all intents and purposes, permanently from the practice of law. Right? Judges used to have discretion, and now, and in the 90s, it became mandatory sentencing.
Yeah, I mean, you take the human element out of it, and you start to have problems, which is
You take that context, that right hemisphere, left eye scanning to ensure that whatever you are assessing with the left hemisphere and the right eye is contextually sound. It's not putting us in a position to where we're going to get attacked while we're eating or executing some sophisticated, complex instruction set.
Sure, yeah. You never see this in engineering, by the way, right?
No.
Like if you began replacing machine parts with the wrong parts, or with let's say substandard parts that were placed there because of their demographic, for example, the machine is going to start experiencing wobble, right, in some degree. Like that phrase will land with engineers.
Yeah. So engineering is my background: electrical engineering, computational engineering. Unfortunately, so we got to differentiate in engineering in three kind of layers. One is the planning, conceptualization, designing,
like civil engineering,
but it covers others, and it's it's basically complexity modeling, complex system modeling. And what are the identification of a substantive need, to use the power one that you were discussing. What are the different component pieces? What are the different engineering requirements, specifications, et cetera? What is the load? What are tolerances, failures, or failover, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's the engineering related to the design and manufacture of the equipment itself, the component pieces, and all of the same requirements there, but more narrow bound to the component piece, the connections, et cetera. And then you have the engineering related to the installation and maintenance of those things. Where we're still in the fundamental design of the actual equipment, system components, and the connective relationships, componentry pieces, and et cetera, we're still pretty solidly on the ground of not doing quota hires. But in the planning, the initial planning, design, function, et cetera, we've gotten a substantive amount, and we have for 20 years or so had substantive number of quota hires in there. And on the maintenance and management of things, that so there's the base engineering level and the top engineering level have been doing quota hires. I mean, diversity hires, but quota hires for 20 years or so, and we are seeing the impact of that. And and again, we're also starting to see it in the hard sciences, and we're also starting to see it in fundamental engineering, electrical engineering, which is my background, mechanical engineering, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've heard there's a report recently from not a prestigious medical school, but a prestigious school where their medical students are no longer capable of passing certain tests. Like not all of them, but a certain amount of them, like 40% of them can't pass tests to and look, man, if you're doing certifications on garbage handling or something, I don't really give a shit what the result of that is. It's a garbage man. But if somebody's going to be prescribing medicine and cutting people open, maybe take a little closer look at their qualifications and capabilities. You know what I mean? And it is.
I come from a family of medical people, doctors, et cetera. Everybody's disappointed I didn't go down that path. I do medical research now, and I'm heavily involved in the National Foundation for Integrative Medicine. But there was a joke in my family, and I have one of my cousins was the head of SOCOM orthopedic trauma surgery, and the other one was the head of WOMAC at one point, et cetera. But there's a joke in the family that what do you call a C student in med school?
Doctor.
Doctor,
Yeah.
but more specifically, an Army doctor or a VA doctor.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah, I've got a jagged scar on the back of my right thigh to prove that shit. Yeah, so really, really problematic that we're, I guess here's a question for you because you've done a lot of work on different parts of this, and you came from a background where you probably saw some levels of humanity that most people that grow up in the suburbs don't get to see, right? How do you balance the empathy, the desire, both individually and collectively, to take care of people with the understanding that iron sharpens iron and that we get catastrophically weak if we don't let some of these natural processes take place?
I wrote a book called The Art of Being a Man, and it's 113 meditations. It's up on Amazon. This is one of those in there that, and I'll paraphrase because I don't have it open, but we can't save everybody. One of the things that happens when you grow up in abject poverty and you grow up out in the wild and you're having to live off the land and raise animals, raise crops, and fend off mountain lions that are trying to get your stock, and sometimes bears, although the bears mostly left us alone. Mountain lions we had a problem with, wolves, coyotes. One of the things you learn fairly early on living in base reality is empathy is very important, and cross-species empathy as well, right? If you're going to keep your horses and your stock alive and healthy. But you can never allow it to get weaponized. And there's a limit to when you don't have a community to compensate for any gaps you have in capabilities or resources, and you have to be self-sufficient. You learn pretty early on that things are going to die, things are going to suffer. There isn't much you can do about it. If you're going to survive and those you care about are going to survive, you need to make very efficient decisions for reasons other than emotional needs. And that means you learn fairly early on to. You ever watch Cowboy Bebop, the anime?
Oh, yeah.
Right? That one Spike Spiegel's statement, you're going to carry that weight.
Mm-hmm.
You learn that shit early on when you are subsistence living, particularly when you came from the lap of luxury and ease before. I mean, I think that's actually probably the best thing that happened, is to go from having a very, very comfortable life as a small child to abject poverty and hardship. I think it was a really hard transition. It happened at the right age, though, right? Probably would have been way harder if I was older when it initiated. But that's what you learn fairly early on, is you're going to carry that weight. And what is that weight? My mother used to say, you got to be ruthless. And I thought she meant with others. And that's not what she meant. What she meant is you got to be ruthless with yourself because you're going to have to do horrible things, painful things, difficult things because they're the right things, the things that have to happen. And you're going to carry the weight of that your entire life. And if you're a real man and develop into a real man, and in women as well in their own way, you only carry more and more weight as you go through life. And what is that weight? It's back to what you were saying. It's having empathy, being compassionate, and still doing the right thing. Not the right thing. I don't say that, right? Because everybody say choose the hard right over the easy wrong. I don't think that's it. I think it's do the horrible thing because it's the only thing that can. It is the only. No, that's not the right way of saying it. Do the horrible thing that is right because it has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the secrets of life that most people take a very long time to recognize and very, very often don't ever recognize is that the weight doesn't get lighter, you get stronger, right? Like that.
Correct.
That's the way all life works. Whether you're a fucking ant or a housefly living for 30 days, or whether you're a human being living for 80 years, right? Or a turtle living for 200. You know, what I mean, it is the weight does not ever get lighter. It never will.
And we need it.
Yeah.
It's what. Are you familiar with dissipative structure theory or dissipative structures?
No.
There's some really good work being done in, how did life come about to begin with, and what is life? But in essence, dissipative structures, and I touch on this in my book, The Eternal War. Basically, it states that there's chaos, noise, disequilibrium is the formal term. Structures naturally emerge out of the noise, out of the disequilibrium, and think in terms of
like a
information.
Diamond.
I'm sorry?
Like a diamond. I mean, it.
Like a diamond, yeah. So structures naturally emerge from the thermal noise, the informational noise, to dissipate that noise, that thermal disequilibrium, to balance it. However, as these structures develop and become more and more complex and sophisticated, they add their own noise, right? It's a higher structured noise. It's able to bear more information, et cetera, which gets to Shannon information theory. But the point being is that it's the hardships alone, right? So think of, chaos, probably is the easiest way of saying it, and the density and sophistication and always in your face kind of chaos that forces us at the cellular level up to develop these structures that are capable of handling and processing constructively more and more of the chaos. And that's the weight, right? We couldn't build those weight-bearing structures if it wasn't for the unmitigating chaos and noise.
I mean, it sounds an awful lot like the symbiotic balance between gravity and nuclear fusion, right? I mean, that's what makes stars. That's why, like, a star competes.
These are dissipative structures. So a star itself emerges as a dissipative structure.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
And then over time, these structures decay and break down, and they devolve into component pieces. However, those component pieces that later dissipative structures will emerge out of are more structured than they were in their raw form, and whatever structure comes next is capable of dissipating, utilizing and dissipating even more chaos and noise and heat and et cetera.
I mean, it speaks to the binary nature of most of organic life, not even organic life, just all matter in the universe.
Which is dissipated.
It's dissipative structure. You mentioned the falling apart. So anybody that understands planetary physics or any of that stuff understands, or not just planetary, but solar physics, understands why it happens. So at some point, the last element to go up to is iron, and when that happens, then a star is going to collapse in on itself, right?
Yeah, or explode.
Or explode, yeah. So what is it that happens exactly? Well, the fusion pushing outward stops. There's no more outward push. So
Yeah.
gravity just collapses
Can't
this thing and then it
dissipate
explodes. Right?
anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's reached. So whatever that complex structure is and how it's evolved has reached the penultimate amount of chaos, energy, disequilibrium, et cetera, that it can dissipate. And that structure will either implode into a sustainable, what is a black hole? It's way more sustainable, or a neutron star, et cetera. It's a way more sophisticated dissipative structure, or it blows off into all of its component pieces because it can't achieve that next higher level of dissipative structure complexity. Take this in the context of combat veterans, and even trauma survivors, because it's not just combat veterans who go through trauma, real trauma in life, rape victims, et cetera. A lot of this, first off, PTSD, we always find in neuroscience, and in the TBI work that we do, we've never met anybody with PTSD that doesn't have an underlying physical brain injury, first off.
Yeah, I agree with that, by the way, not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I've been telling people a lot over the last couple of years, but especially recently, that this PTSD thing gets cast primarily as a mental health problem, and I don't think
Yeah,
that's
and
it.
it's not.
There's brain
It's
injury,
physical. Yeah.
and there's hormone imbalances that are causing the vast majority
Yeah,
of
so
this.
the brain injury causes neuroendocrine dysregulation, the neuroendocrine dysregulation. So the problem with the human, not to go too far down, but it's germane to the continuing the dissipative structure conversation. The problem that we linguistic monkeys have is that we translate everything into a narrative. The way we do not engage with the world sensorially, like we like to think, we engage with it linguistically. That's both the internal world and the external world. So when there is when there is a break, hardware damage, and the hardware and the software that's running on the hardware, it's not directly applicable, but it's not so far off. When the software that you've developed, excuse me, over the course of your life is not functioning quite properly because the hardware it's running on is physically broken. Think a circuit board that's got, broken gates, et cetera. So it's not quite processing, moving electrons around properly, et cetera. What happens there is the hormonal system that does all of the regulation of all of the timing and all of the function, et cetera, is the first thing that gets dysregulated. What's happening that whole time, though, as we're becoming less and less capable of being who we were and responding to common stimuli the way we used to, is we create a narrative around it. And because it's so far off and there isn't the things going on around our life that would justify being off so much, we go back to the last great trauma event and hold to that and build a narrative around that, because it is an anchor point.
It's an effigy, right, for the struggle.
Correct. Well, it's an anchor point on the last place where we were actually functioning properly to what our, identity stack that we started to develop and we were actually in the womb. But you've developed your identity stack. Your physical brain's laid down by about 3.5 years of age. Psychological brain, neural processing brain is set down by about 7.5 years of age, and then up through our teen years into our 20s, we developed our identity. Fully develop an identity stack that is driven by the physical brain's physical ways in which it processes information, the social levels in which we process that information, and then all of that in the context of who we are in the world. When we take sufficient enough blow to the head, for all intents and purposes, and really in reality, and a lot of us take numerous injuries, which I did back in 2009. I didn't know about it, which didn't help me in SF service. But when we take sufficient enough physical injury to the brain that it causes enough dysregulation over time, our identity stack starts to come apart. And I say an identity stack because we have a whole number of different identities. One, which is the identity of the relationship we have with our own physical self, our own psychological self, with those in our close network, our family, and that stack shifts and adjusts. Your identity shifts and adjusts based off relativistically who and what we're engaging with. But that stack, and that's a complex thing like Jung worked on, that stack starts to come undone when you have sufficient enough brain injury that causes enough neuroendocrine dysregulation and other dysregulation,
Right.
synaptic firing, et cetera, over time. Part of the reason guys have and gals have PTSD is all related to the physical break in the brain and the dysregulation, but they fixate on that, that experience because that's the last time their identity stack was that they grew up and developed was whole. So it gives them an anchor on to the person that they used to be, even if it's a horrible anchor.
Yeah, it's not.
The problem is, I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
Well, the problem is that you'll never go back. That person. So it took me. So I was 8 years before I finally got diagnosed. I went from having everything to being homeless. I'm not living on the street kind of homeless. I've been a practicing Buddhist my whole life, so meditation has helped even in the worst of it. But I just couldn't find decisions. I couldn't. Point being, it took 8 years for me to finally get diagnosed, to get brain scans, Dr. Amen, neuroendocrine testing with Dr. Gordon. I'm very grateful some SF guys and a foundation stepped in to help me out. Andrew Moore with Warrior Angel Foundation. About a year later, though, I started doing treatments. I was responding. I'd been in treatments for about a year. Things were going well. And I was driving across Mississippi in a downpour, a southern downpour. And I had to pull off the side of the road because I realized that, and hit me physiologically, neurologically hit me that the guy I had been for 40 some odd years had died back in 2009. And I've been dragging his corpse around and that identity stack around for, at that point, about 10 years, 10 years. On life support, trying to hope that one day I was going to be able to resuscitate him. And I needed to let that person go and bury him and set to the hard work of continuing the physical damage repair, the neurological repair, and now add to that identity stack. Who the hell am I now?
Right. Yeah. And there's not the problem that we are having right now, I think, is there aren't enough pills or therapy to throw at that problem that will ever make a dent in it. It's not, that's not how it works. Like, I don't know if you remember this, but at Bragg, around the time that you actually showed up back there, I guess in the 2000s, 2007, 8, 9 time frame, when they started bringing in, beefing up the number of counselors that were there. A couple of them I went to, and I talked to them like, what did you do before this? And like, oh, we were like rape counselors before this. Because they thought, it makes sense to some degree. Victims of rape often develop post-traumatic stress, and maybe this is the same. And I'm not talking shit. That's just the best theory they had at the time. But it is, I won't say it's entirely a hardware problem, but it is mostly a hardware problem. And it's also a hardware problem to the degree that if you don't solve the hardware problem, there's no software solution for it.
Okay, so it's 100% a hardware problem. However, the software can damage the hardware or interfere with the hardware repair. So there's 3 stacks. There's the biomolecular stack, the bioelectrical stack, and the neurocog neuropsych stack. And that's what life is. The biomolecular is only there to maintain and regulate the bioelectrical fields, and the neurocog neuropsych emerge out of the bioelectrical fields. They're mostly independent, although they're all heavily dependent upon one another. if you don't approach each stack individually at the same time, so you're doing neuroendocrine modulation and microbiome work, and you're getting the right nutrients and the right hormones, then you're not able to maintain the proper bioelectrical fields, which is what life really is. And I'd look to the work of Dr. Michael Levin at Tufts University, Nick Lane at University College London, and some others, Dr. Jack Cruz. And if you can't maintain those bioelectrical fields properly, then your neuropsych's not going to, your identity stuff, your, who I am as a human, et cetera, isn't going to be working properly. However, and you can do the biomolecular stuff right. You can get the bioelectrical working much better. But if you don't do some form of therapy, if you don't do primarily identity stack rediscovery and development, the dysregulation that comes from the neuropsych level will dysregulate the bioelectrical fields again, which will then dysregulate the biomolecular again. So you've got to address all three simultaneously, but you can't just talk therapy. You can't fix the biomolecular through talk therapy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean,
it's not possible.
Well, I mean, the way I think of it is like fixing your form when you're working out, and if you want to take a 30,000-foot view, eating the right food and also being active, right? Like you can do, when you're in your 20s, you can do one or the other. When you're in your 30s, you got to do both. When you're in your 40s, you got to do both plus some, right? Just to stay in a conscious state of fitness like that. So yeah, I mean, the things are complementary for sure. There's no. My issue is that the vast majority of people's approach to this issue is simply software, and it's because that's where the money is. To be frank, the testosterone TRT is cheap as fuck, right? It's cheap these days. It's pretty cheap. It drives me nuts that we have this issue of hormone dysregulation amongst the vast majority of of 20, 30, 40-year-old men in general, but especially military people who have been exposed to toxic bullshit, guns, bombs, all this shit. It drives me crazy that this problem can literally be solved for about $80 a month plus some effort on the part of the individual.
We got to be very careful there, though. Okay, so if somebody is doing straight testosterone for more than 6 months, they hyper dysregulate the rest of their hormonal system.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do maintenance for sure, right?
You got to be, so this is why we far bias towards peptides, because augment the body's and stimulate the body's natural production of the hormones that it requires.
Yeah, like like ipamorelin and CJC 1295 are really useful.
A whole lot of things, yeah, and GHRH and gonadorelin and other things, and it depends and it fluctuates across time. But we're finding more and more that we don't want to give the human body the end hormone because cells have to maximize metabolism and downstream metabolism, toxin extraction, all of that type of stuff, and they have to do it in community with trillions of other cells in a limited space of time. And there's something like 100,000 chemical reactions in a cell in a single second, and there's hundreds of trillions of cells that make up our bodies and biomes. It's unbelievably complex. So cells have to optimize metabolism, upstream and downstream metabolism. And so if you give them the end hormone, they will stop doing the upstream work necessary to have the materials, and then that dysregulates the community, et cetera. So we find giving peptides in the ways and places that we can for legal medical reasons, that we wind up with vastly less dysregulation. Now, some people, when they first start getting, because they've gone so long dysregulated, you have to give them both HGH. And by the way, you never want to do just TRT without HGH.
Or even anastrozole. Like you need to make sure that you're capturing the downstream side effects of TRT.
Absolutely. So what we find is that some for like myself when I first started, that's what I had to do because my levels were so low and so
I'm the same,
inconsistent.
by the way. I started out taking a full cc a week of testosterone
Yeah.
cypionate, and I over time supplementing with peptides, taking Fedoja,
Mm.
improving my diet and exercising
Diet.
more. I
What
I
about, are you
and
getting the
sleep.
red sunlight?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
need
yeah,
sunlight. We
yeah,
need sunlight.
yeah,
Don't listen to all that garbage. We need sunlight.
yeah. Sunlight
And
helps.
particularly, we need the early morning sun, the angle of the sun. So you get the red light at the angle of the sun early in the morning and at the evening.
Yeah,
And you need to take it into the eyes in particular because there's a whole lot of melanin related processing stuff that happens in
yeah,
the
for sure.
eyes.
And that
Don't
has
stare at the sun, kids.
don't stare at the sun. Yeah, but that like honestly, that plus good sleep will fix a lot of it as well. But
Yes.
a lot of people
So,
like I'm all
yeah.
the way down injectable TRT level. I'm all the way down to like zero point 0.1 twice a week. That's all I take
Yeah.
now, right? And I started out at 10 times that much.
Yeah. 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 You
So
had to.
yeah,
You had
but now
to.
like that should be your goal. Just for those out there that are listening to this that
Yeah.
want to fix this problem, your goal should be to get down to as little, if not no, testosterone as possible, and let your body naturally produce that shit.
Also got to so to that, and the sleep is a big deal. We use Nucalm for a lot of our guys, Nucalm, and it does very well on the sleep regulation and getting people down into theta
Yeah.
because you have to.
We use Sleep Remedy from Dr. Parsley here in Austin. He's a former Navy SEAL.
Gotcha.
Same. I think the ingredients are close though.
Gotcha. Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize a lot of what happens with brain injuries, and there's two types of brain injuries, right? Physical blow, but you can also get what's called acquired brain injury from prolonged stress, trauma, nutritional toxins, other toxins, et cetera. So you can get the same kind of damage and dysregulation, which does even lead to dissipation of identity stack over time, as you're not able to do the fine tune things you used to be able to do, and you start to lose confidence. So I don't want to put this all just to the traumatic, the blow or blast wave kind of brain injuries.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. This homeostasis is gonna fix a lot of your problems, like getting inflammation out of your body, making sure that
Yes.
your organs are
Yeah.
operating properly, make sure you're getting good sleep, make sure that your hormones are right. If you take care
Yeah,
of
so
those things, you're
leaky
going to be
gut's
pretty
a
good.
big one. Leaky gut's the really big one because inflammation leaks through the gut, gets into the gut-brain axis.
Yeah, I'm
gets into
dealing
the
with that
brain.
right now. Actually, it's a pain.
Are
in
ya?
the, it's literally a pain in the ass. Yeah, it's like.
Are you making your own pre and probiotics?
Well, right now I'm still in the discovery phase. I've sent literal boxes of shit off to gut
Yeah,
health
so I
specialists.
would make my own stuff. So there's a book. I'll have to dig it out, man.
Oh, this
I
isn't
can't
to
remember it.
make a gut biome thing. This is just to see what parasites or what might be in there.
Uh,
But yeah,
uh,
yeah.
oh, I see.
On
I
the
see.
on
I
the
see.
probiotic side, yeah, I'll be making my own stuff. I mean, there's
Okay, so
there's a lot of fun stuff you can do at home with like honey and lemons and
Yeah, oh,
and
yeah.
onions
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
shit like that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a reason that the French don't get fat,
Mm.
or the Greeks in Greece, outside of Greece, maybe
Sure.
a little different, right? But they've been doing their own pre and probiotics for millennia.
Yeah, and that has a huge effect on hormones and mood as well. I mean, all of your dopamine, all your
Ding.
oxytocin, all your serotonin is made in your gut,
Ding.
right?
90+% of all hormones are created, and neuromodulators and regulators are actually created in the gut, not in the brain.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So the gut is, and plus there's, roughly 90 to 100 trillion living cells in your physical body. There's
Right.
4 to 5 times that amount in the gut.
yeah,
We know through direct DNA coding, there's 4,500-ish species, but we know from all kinds of DNA, we haven't been able to piece together into a specific species yet, that there's maybe 10 times that many different species of biota in the gut.
yeah.
So something like 45,000 different species living in this community of hundreds of trillions.
Yeah, so if you're like especially a GWAT veteran, you spent some time in some bad places, and also
Correct.
just more broadly speaking, the American diet. You've gotten some things in you that shouldn't be there.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So we don't get healthy fiber in American diet anymore unless you eat real foods.
Yeah.
You need raw milk. Raw milk makes most people's raw A2 milk makes most people's colitis go away, makes most people's uh, lactose intolerance go away, et cetera, et cetera.
That's yeah.
Caveat being there that that's for Northern European peoples, because other peoples from other latitudes have different um, genetic tolerances for milk, particularly cow's milk.
Yeah.
Right. Southern latitudes can do milk, but it's more goats and
Sheep and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Well,
then you got the horse milk.
I'm all set
in
on horse milk.
Mongolia.
But
Yeah.
I'm a Northern European, so I don't have to deal with that shit.
Yeah.
We got to get out of here. But before we do, tell everybody where they can find you, your work, and stuff like that. Tell them about the Integrative Medicine Foundation, all the stuff, and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Twitter X, whatever somebody wants to call it. It's probably best for dialogue. I've got a couple books on Amazon: The Eternal War, The Art of Being a Man, a couple other business special forces books. I got to rewrite those. But LinkedIn, I'm not on there very often, but I've written a lot on there, and I keep my business stuff there. But X is probably the best place to play under my name, EM Burlingame. They're on X. National Foundation for Integrative Medicine, NFIM, founded by the former Assistant Surgeon General of the Air Force, who was also a fighter pilot and test pilot and any Spartan Greek, kind of the guy I think I wanted to be if I wasn't colorblind. We do a lot of things for vets there. We've been doing Havana syndrome treatments for folks that are getting hit with targeted energy weapons, which is happening more and more, even here on U.S. soil. We do a lot of TBI related things. We do some QRF for some guys here and there. We don't have a lot of capacities there, but we get involved. What we're doing mostly now is there's so many extraordinary innovations in diagnostics and treatment modalities that are out there, but they're just not in the norm. And we're collating a lot of that, ensuring that it has the good hard science behind it, and it's all medically sound. And then we're working on how do we get it through regulatory payor side of things, et cetera, so that we can get more, not just vets, but we're finding this whole left hemisphere, right hemisphere, neuro dysregulation, identity stack dissolution is kind of happening society-wide, civilization-wide right now. And how can we focus on helping people through NFIM and good medicine to get the biomolecular, bioelectrical, and the neurocog right?
Well, it's a lot of work going on there. And it does extend well beyond the veteran community. I mean, the average 21-year-old in America right now has got the same level of testosterone that the 65-year-old had in 2000. So there's a problem, and it's nationwide. It's worse for veterans, sure, but it's everywhere, which, should, hopefully help get some of these treatments normalized, and maybe even some of the prophylaxis stuff, like removing the shit food from our diets, would be great. Thanks for coming today, man. I appreciate it. There's a lot of good information.
All right, brother. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, we'll see you again sometime soon, and thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.